Hello, hello. Oh, I'm down here in the corner. Hey! Hope you guys are doing well. So, we're going to be working on chapters 5 and 6, or the first 2 years of life, starting that out with biosocial and cognitive. Now, what I'm going to do in the screencast is focus mostly on those things. I'll go over a lot of stuff sort of generally, but focus on the things that I might have additional information from the text on, or that you really, there might be more explanation needed than what you can see in on the PowerPoint, or that I just kind of want to stand out. So not everything I'm going to spend a lot of time on. I know you're probably going, thank God. Okay, here we go. So 0 to 2, here, our baby. They've come out. We've finished chapter 4, and we went through genetics, and now they're here in our arms. And what's going to happen to them for the next 2 years? So first of all, let me hide myself. This is my little guy right here when he was in this time period. First of all, physically, they're going to grow. This is the time in life when we grow the most. I mean, the fastest. So they're going to double their birth weight by month 4, triple it by age 1, quadruple by age 2. Think about if we kept growing at that rate. Oh my Lord, it would not be good. So, and much of it in these very beginnings is fat to protect the brain. The body is always giving its resources first and foremost to the brain. Think about even in that prenatal development when so much of our we grew that part of us first because, well, one, it's the headquarters and runs everything, but two, also, it's what makes us distinctly human in so many ways, and it's a big brain, so it continues to grow. Anyway, so average height, grow 14 inches from birth to age 2. By age 2, they are about 50% of adult height. So just think about that. If we continued to grow, 14 inches every 2 years, how tall we'd be. So this is what this time period is so much about. These numbers are norms and average measurement. So again, my little guy, he's a lot smaller than the norm, and that can freak moms and dads out and so forth. But, as long as they continue to grow on their curve, then they're okay, that they are continuing to grow. It's when they stop growing that there can be a problem. So one thing we talk about, head sparing, this is kind of a biological mechanism, protects the brain. So the brain will be the last thing to be damaged by any type of malnutrition. So if a child is not getting everything that they need, we can make sure that the brain is going to be protected for as long as possible. So we talk about this like percentile. If you have a baby, for the first, beginnings here, you feel like you're going to the doctor every week. And every time they go, they measure the length, the weight, and the head circumference. So they want to make sure that all of this is growing on track. So like and you'll leave the office. I mean, my son is 11 and they still check these things, not his head circumference, but the weight and height. 50th percentile is the midpoint. So if they say your kid is in the 50th percentile, it means half of children that age are, say they're in 50th percentile for height. Half that children that age would be taller, according to these norms. Half would be shorter. Again, this can get a little scary. We tend to think like in grades or something, oh, 98 is best. Not necessarily. You don't necessarily want your kid 98th percentile for weight, especially if they're not the 98th percentile for height. And, so either range can be concerning, but, again, my son is very small, tends to be under 10% on everything all the time, and has been as like 3%, 4%. And of course, we've talked to doctors about this and so forth. And basically, as long as he is growing on his curve, so they give you like this curve, as long as he continues to grow and they see growth, they say it's fine. We don't want to see them level off or start going down. That can be failure to thrive or, a distinct problem. So let's focus on brain development. So by the age of 2, the brain is 75% its adult weight. So as much as we think the body is growing, the brain is growing even faster. Height is, 50% and weight is 20 by age 2, but we have the brain at 75%. So, keep in mind the brain didn't do all of its growing in utero because it's such a big brain that no mother would ever want to give birth to any child. Circumference increases 35% in the first year. So imagine if that happened before they were born. Anyway, so neural connections in the brain are also developing. Infants have billions of neurons. Some of those are in the brainstem, kind of running all of our automatic processes, breathing, contracting of the heart, circulatory systems, things that we don't have to think about to make happen. Some in the midbrain that kind of helps us create emotions, memory, things like that. 70% is in the cortex, or the neocortex, the outer layer of the brain, and the thinking brain. Cortex is 80% of the human brain, which makes it's largest in any mammals, not the largest brain, but the largest in proportion. So here's the thing. Neurons are constantly, anytime anything happens to us, neurons that are involved in that process of thinking or acting fire together. We talked about this in the stress video screencast. So, they fire together. So this is how a child learns anything and everything, that these neurons fire and wire together. And they have billions of neurons when they come out. So they're an open vessel, an open canvas. So much potentiality there in terms of what can be learned, what can be connected. So it's quite amazing what's going on in the beginning. If you've taken any other kinds of like Psych 101 or, you may have seen all of this in greater detail than we do in this class. But just to give you an idea, the neuron, this is an axon, dendrites, these connect to another neuron, and this is how information moves between them. Right here, they share information. They never touch in this synapse that it's called, this space in between, but they send neurotransmitters across to kind of carry information, and to either inhibit some action or activate an action. So this is constantly going on, and these synapses are what grow, fire, and this is the firing that causes the wiring together for any kind of learning that we do. So if you can think about it, we have kind of a 3-scoop brain. Deep inside is that, part of us that manages all of those automatic systems. And that's, completely online before we're even born. Midbrain, that's that sort of deep inside emotional memory centers, impulses, and we see that is really important to us in our first year of life. The prefrontal cortex, that 3rd scoop. So the 2nd scoop came online with early mammals. With early mammals, we can see emotion, impulses, the ability to decide what to go towards and what to stay away from. The prefrontal cortex came online the strongest with more primates and humans. Underlies cognition, planning, abstractions, more deep thinking about things, and it develops all the way into our mid-20s. So, you have to think about it. When a baby is first born, their kind of 1st and 2nd scoop are running the show the most. The prefrontal cortex is certainly there, and it's making connections, but they're not doing a whole lot of deep thinking and planning, right? Most of what we do, is those emotions, impulses, automatic reflexes, and things like that. So we have the 1st and 2nd scoop for our newborns in this first year, and then a lot about life is how we create these neurons, how we fire and wire in all of these, in that 2nd and 3rd scoop, to kind of create who we become. Connections between neurons and between areas of the brain form through experience. Connections through the PFC, which is that 3rd scoop, that highest scoop, and the emotional centers, which is our 2nd. So connections between our 2nd and 3rd scoop And I actually, when we were talking about stress, it's also this. Our second scoop is actually, we would say, in here. This is our limbic center, and this is our prefrontal cortex when we're looking at the hand model. So the connections between these two, between our emotional centers and our thinking centers, the more connections we have, the greater emotional regulation we grow. And so a lot of that isn't even, these are our greatest centers in that first year, and we're building this anatomy basically with our children in the first couple of years as this continually comes online, and we're building the connection slowly here because this goes all the way into our mid-20s. Okay, so proliferation. Okay, I had a little break there, sorry. Proliferation and pruning. Okay, so baby is born, all of these billions of neurons, and experience is starting to fire and wire these neurons together based on what's learning and what's around baby. And we come into this world with our neurology, with neuroplasticity, which we've talked about, and the ability to shape the brain based on experience. And so we come in with that, and then we come in with our surroundings and our environment into our particular culture, our particular families, and we find ourselves diving into particular experiences. And so baby's brain, though it doesn't look like newborns are doing much, their brains are just firing and wiring like crazy for their, everything they're learning physically, motor-wise, but then also for all of these experiences around them, they are just absorbing and firing and wiring and shaping this brain. So they have what's called this transient exuberance, 5-fold increase in dendrites in the cortex in the first 24 months of life. So their dendrites, the ability to make these connections, to wire together, is just blows up. All kinds of different synapses can, connect together. And then 100 trillion synapses at age 2, 40,000 a second, occurs postnatally in humans due to brain size, right? Okay. So we have this exuberance that happens, and then we have, within this first 2 years, a major time of pruning, and unused neurons and misconnected dendrites wither and die. It's a little like, deadheading a garden. You're going to take off the dead parts of a plant in order to bring the nutrients to the living parts of that plant. And so it's a lot like that. The neurons that are not getting used are going to die. And so this is actually a good thing, because too much going on in the brain, too much is inefficient and can be just not even good for the brain. Now, actually, I read a couple of years ago studies being done, research being done on, autism is one thing that has many, many, many fingers of research going on. Genetics, gut biome, neurology, so many different areas, environment and so forth, looking at autism. And one thing that was looked at was, is it an inefficient pruning? Is there not enough pruning? So there's too much going on in the brain, right? So how does the environment and nurture influence these pruning patterns? Well, depending on what baby experiences, those are going to get used. The brain is very much a use it or lose it organ. So you use it and you strengthen those, but a child who doesn't have an opportunity to use particular parts of the brain, whether they be for memory or emotion or thinking, whatever it may be, could potentially lose those capacities, or they're not going to be as efficient or as mature. They're going to struggle with those places. So pruning is a very important part. We have another huge pruning session in adolescence, kind of later in adolescence. So this is one of our big pruning times, is in this 0 to 2 time. Huge outburst of what we have in order to what can we wire, and then pruning these things down to consider, how our brain shows up and how it shapes. So if we look at this, lack of experiences causes some dendrites to wither away. Experience expectant. So I really do want you to kind of get a really big feel, because if you ever study in this field at all, you're going to hear these terms: experience expectant and experience dependent development. Experience expectant is basically we come into this world wired for potential opportunities. We come in with senses that are wired to hear, to smell, to see. We actually come in wired to connect and love. And so we come in biologically, neurologically sort of ready to experience the world. And so we have experience expectant development that happens. Common experiences. So it's going to be opportunities to see, hear, communicate, touch, and be loved. Just those general experiences. Now, experience dependent development, which goes on throughout our whole life, is the variances. So we might come in wired to see, and so that's experience expectant. The body expects to see as long as our vision is working. What we see is experience dependent. It's dependent upon our environment, upon our culture, upon what's around us and the people around us and what kinds of experiences we're given. So language, adult reactions, what is specifically seen, heard, felt, and communicated. And this is going to vary by family and cultures. A musician and a poet's brains are wired differently because of different brain regions have been exercised. So we may have the genetics to be a musician, but if we're never given the opportunity to, to practice that, it could get pruned away to some extent. But because, a musician has practiced and practiced and practiced that through their whole life, particular parts of their brain are going to be stronger, bigger than it would for a poet. Maybe a poet's brains in areas that understand abstractions and metaphors, but also language, are going to be stronger, where the musician for whatever, all the motor skills of strumming a guitar or playing a flute, as well as the ability to recognize notes and their hearing and all of that. So please understand experience expectant, experience dependent. This is where how does the brain start to shape? Neuroplasticity is with us from the very get-go. And how our brain shapes specifically has a lot to do with this. It's expecting things, but what does it get? Okay, so what begins to shape our brain? Because the truth is, I'm trying to get you to understand that in life now as adults, we can have some say in what shapes our brain, but our brain started shaping long before we had any kind of control over it or any kind of say. When we were first, shot out of the womb, these things, began shaping long before then, actually. I do want you to understand this term too, self-writing, which is an inborn drive to fix a developmental deficit. So babies that don't have a lot of toys, or say a newborn, and parents the parent doesn't spend a lot of time giving them things to look at, or really giving their eyes the opportunity to see a whole lot. A baby will find what's in its immediate environment to feed experience expectant things. The child without a lot of toys will bang on pots and pans. And I feel like we do this self-writing thing throughout life. We'll talk about it again, especially in adolescence. But we seek out, there's something that drives us to seek out our best development, even if it's not given to us in our immediate surroundings. So one last one here, and then I'll stop this particular screencast and we'll do another one. There's a part of the brain for every function in the human body. So, there's a, somatosensory part of the brain that maps everything that's for touch. So every finger, everything, and it's actually bigger parts for parts that feel touch more, like fingers. And, skin that gets touched more is larger in this somatosensory cortex and area. We also have something called the insula, which is like mapped out the organs in terms of registering what's going on inside of them. And so every part of the brain, every part of the body has a part of the brain. And one of the strongest for babies, when they first come out, sensory centers are developed very early, but the fusiform face center I would just say it's a part of the brain that helps us recognize and perceive faces and start to read them. And reading faces is something that babies become experts in, or at least that's kind of one of their first big lessons in life. The Fusiform Face Center, actually, though it's called that sometimes, you'll actually just see it called the Fusiform Center. It's not really just for faces, it's for anything that we might become an expert in terms of, say, you're a bird watcher and you can tell the differences between species of birds. Anything that you can read the differences among general ideas. So cars, if you're a big car person and you can tell the very distinct differences between types of cars and so forth, your Fusiform Face Center will light up. But faces is what it does best, and it can read faces. And so babies, this is one of their first things that they're learning. And an interesting thing I like to tell about this is Richard Davidson, who's a neuroscientist out of Wisconsin, did some work, because one of the things, again, about autism was the idea, one of the theories is that it's kind of a broken fusiform face center, because one thing that's common amongst autistics, wherever they are on the spectrum, is a difficulty in looking people in the eye and reading kind of facial cues and social cues, but part of that's facial cues and reading faces and difficulty looking at faces. So he did a study where he put little skull cap on autistic children and to read their brains while they looked at faces, not real faces, but pictures of faces. And one thing he found was that even just looking at a face, their amygdala, which perceives like fear, spiked huge to a point of like showing terror, not just a little bit of nervousness, but terror. And so if we think about this, how do we look at that? Well, if looking at a face creates a sense of terror in you, what are you going to do? You're going to look away. And so looking away and not making eye contact could be a coping mechanism. That's a good one if you're feeling terrified. It could also be that maybe if this is happening for children as the Fusiform Face Center is growing, perhaps it doesn't grow as well or get wired and fired and wired together because we don't look, and so it doesn't get used. The brain, again, it's like muscles that have to be used in order to grow. So I find that a very interesting thing to consider when we look at that. We're going to talk a lot more about babies and reading faces in Chapter 7. I'm going to stop this one now just to keep it a little bit short. I know, 22 minutes, maybe not too short for you. But anyway, I will see you again.